This is going somewhere interesting. First of all, okay, and maybe I'll try and find the footage on this. Um, I know that these are pretty famous posters behind him, but it is technically not the right etiquette to actually wear a flag, right? And there was a big incident at the Australia Games in, I think it was 2000, the Australia Olympics, in which there was, I think, two or three track stars who, when they won their races, they um, wrapped themselves up with the flags and tried to like show off their muscles and stuff, and it was highly frowned upon. It was something that was considered really inappropriate. That's not how you're supposed to treat the American flag. All you Republicans, you think that us Democrats, like, we're not patriots, right? I was a Cub Scout committee chair, and every year I took my son to a day camp in which part of the day they would spend some time at the archery range, and they would get a lesson in vexillology at the beginning of every session. So they would start with the original flag. They would talk about the history behind it. And they would do this every day. They would like move through the flags as we gained more states, right? If you think that we're not patriotic, you're sorely wrong. I mean, I think that our disconnect at this point is that you're believing so many conspiracy theories and have developed so much hate for the people around you that you don't know how to coexist with your neighbors anymore. Like, that's where you are. I was on the phone yesterday with my boyfriend, and an elder lady, probably in her 60s or 70s, walked up to my balcony and told me to take my phone call inside. And I said, I'm sitting on my private property having a phone call, and you're on a public sidewalk. Go the fuck home, you crazy bitch. I don't understand what's going on with you Republicans that you have to be so fucking rude and hostile to the people around you. But that's what's happening in my neighborhood. And there's at least a dozen. There's at least a dozen right in my neighborhood that only has like couple hundred tops units in this neighborhood. And we have that many people who are so crazed by Trump and QAnon and all of their other bullshit that they are willing to just come up to somebody's property and start yelling at it. It's disorderly conduct. It's fucking illegal. But they know they can get away with it because the Orange County Sheriff doesn't give a shit.
A nice neighborhood that's been there for 200 years. So I always turn to Kevin for that. So I'm thrilled to welcome Kevin Cruz to the show. Kevin, great to be here. Kevin is a professor of history at Princeton University, specializes in the. Welcome on Democracy, FP Wellman. I am FP Wellman. Welcome joining us on the Midas Touch Network tonight. CBS News had a poll come out this week of possible, I guess, likely Republican primary voters. And you got to believe, this thing's shocking. It says 2024 Republican voters are looking for a nominee, and they prefer a candidate who, 85% of them wants him to challenge woke ideas. 66% want to oppose any gun restrictions. 61% they want a guy who will say Trump won. And then 57% want someone who makes liberals angry. And that is no shit the issues we face. So a lot of us are constantly asking ourselves, do we live in unprecedented times? I'm not sure. So I'm excited to have a guest this week that's going to ask that. I'm going to ask that question, and he's going to answer. So let's get on with the show.
True or false? You can pour hot water.
Welcome. I am Fred Wellman, as mentioned before the music. This is On Democracy. Hopefully you found the right place here on the Midas Touch Network and elsewhere. I am so excited to have you with us. I do keep asking myself if we live in historic times for years now. And as we've dealt with, the various issues, the book's falling down, Matt, is this truly historic precedent? And I turn to history. I'm a student of history myself, not a professional, but I went to the military academy. I've studied these things, and I constantly see myself turning to the past to understand where we are. So I'm really excited to have a guest who can actually put that perspective. And I've often turned to Kevin Kruse on Twitter or in a publication to put things in perspective and understand the moment we face. And he's very, very good at that. His writing has been really, I learned so much, and not to blow smoke up him, he's not on camera yet, I don't think. But the underpinnings, for example, the underpinnings of modern traffic jams being rooted in segregation. He was part of the 2019, he wrote a piece in 2019 for the 1619.
What he's talking about right here is, I have formally heard about this in 2018 as it's called the Shrinking Cities Strategy. And it's where you make life so difficult for the residents that they cannot advance. So when he's talking about like using traffic as segregation. Okay, so in California, we have two main arteries of freeways that run up and down between LA and Orange County. It's the 5 and the 405. Whenever they do work on the 5, it takes decades to complete. When they do it on the 405, they wrap it up pretty quickly because that's the west side. And I mean, even my mother has said she would prefer to drive the 405 because it's more likely that people are insured. Honestly, I would prefer to drive the 405 because there's usually less construction. And when they do have construction, it wraps up pretty quickly. But there's been an initiative since the Obama years of repairing bridges, because we had a big, in the mid to late aughts, we had a lot of bridge failures. And so as part of the infrastructure bill to try and rebuild America, they put a ton of money into rebuilding bridges. So what they did on the 5 freeway is they left the last bridge for over a decade to actually complete. And so this has been going on for like 15 years up in an impoverished area of LA County. And they just finished it very recently.
Project. I've witnessed that here in St. Louis, where our highways are directed right through Richmond Heights, and we get a traffic jam where it dog legs around the nice neighborhood that's been there for 200 years. So I always turn to Kevin for that. So I'm thrilled to welcome Kevin Kruse to the show. Kevin, great to be here. Kevin is a professor of history at Princeton University, specializes in the political, social, and suburban history of 20th century America, with a particular interest in conflicts over race, rights, and religion, the making of modern conservatism. Published books and dozens of articles, and your most recent publication here on...
Oh, the irony that the conservatives want to address this issue now, because literally you set us up for this bullshit.
On the stand, which is too thick to sit on the stand that I have. We got to buy a new stand, Matt. Is Myth America. It's a collection of essays from historians taking on the biggest legends and lies about our past. Kevin's the co-editor of that. Kevin, welcome to the show. It's great to see you from coming in, dialing in from Princeton in beautiful New Jersey.
Still good to be here, Fred.
I appreciate that. I joke a lot that, and Matt's sick of it, I think, the joke, but I joke that I really only had this podcast to talk to cool people and use an excuse for them to come see. Because if I have a podcast, I can't just call you. So anyway, I've been wanting to talk to you for years. Thanks for being my latest cool dude to hang out with. I really kind of want to jump right in with that big question, right? Big question from the top. Do we live in unprecedented times, and can the history of this country tell us what comes next for all of us? I think that's sort of your basis for your work, right? I mean, do we face, is it truly an unprecedented time, and what comes next?
Well, look, I mean, as an historian, I'm required by law to answer. Nothing's truly unprecedented. We can always, I think, find a little bit of guidance in the past for where we are.
Right.
And yet we don't always copy the past either, right? I mean, so Mark Twain's line, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Right.
I think is pretty apt. And as for where we go from here, again, as an historian, I'm required by law to tell you that my professional training is in hindsight, I'm really not trained well to make predictions, but I'll try my best to try to maybe speculate a little bit here. But I do think, all joking aside, and those caveats aside, we really are kind of off the rails here in the last, we're kind of the Trump era. Really took a turn and injected things into our politics, our political discourse, our public life. We just thought weren't part of what this country was, right? And it's what's really been alarming is how normal a lot of it has come to feel in a short amount of time, right?
Really?
And we all have that feeling of, oh, this is unprecedented, and it happens.
Oh, I'm sorry. This feels normal to you? This feels normal to you? It feels normal to you for your neighbors to be incredibly hostile to you if they disagree with your politics? That people can't coexist anymore and like come together on the issues that they agree on? This is normal to you? That they're focusing on QAnon and Hunter Biden and a bunch of bullshit at all times? This is fucking normal to you? No, it's not normal.
2 or 3 times, and we suddenly think, oh, well, this is just the politics as usual.
Precedented.
Right?
Now it's precedented.
So that's, I think, what historians have to guard against is actually how abnormal some of this stuff is.
Okay. Yeah, and that's something, I wrote a piece the other day for my Substack. Make sure to subscribe. and it's, I was joking at the end of the Substack, talking about the Republican Party, where they are today, and how this party I was a Republican until 2015, a voter. I was never an activist, but again, I always say often on the show that this isn't the party.
2015? Fuck's sake, man. You went through the Tea Party and still didn't leave? You watched all that racist bullshit that they were doing against Obama during his first term? And decided, yep, I can still relate to I left the Republican Party as soon as he got elected, for the most part. 2009, once they started doing their town halls and stuff and putting up a bunch of racist signage, and I mean, like, I couldn't associate myself with that anymore. Like, I always fancied myself a log cabin Republican when I was younger, and I realized I didn't really know enough about politics. I had the wrong take. People can evolve. And you should. 2015, dude. You waited that fucking long? Oh my God.
Was part of that. This is not something. That's why I joined the Lincoln Project. The Trumpism and this authoritarian movement has become very different. But a lot of people feel like they just can't accept that the party may be gone, right? And again, look into history in my Substack. At the end of it, I made a joke for a paragraph saying, "Hey, whatever happened to those Whigs?" Right? And the Whigs went away, I think 1861, essentially with the just before the Civil War, as the party split over slavery. So it has been unusual that we've had just 2 political parties essentially since the 1860s, but there is a precedent in the past that parties do go away, right? I mean, there isn't a sure thing that Republicans are going to find. And this stems from my discussions a lot of where are the reasonable Republicans that are going to save the party.
Right.
And a lot of us who are in this profession say, well, it's not going to be saved. I mean, what is history?
The reasonable Republicans fucking became Democrats, dude, and now they're fucking up our party. Let's be real.
Tell us that, again, joking about the Whigs, and all, I know it may not be your area, but you have watched this civil rights and the changes in our country, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, and the party system isn't fixed or permanent. We've had several iterations over 3 or 4 major systems in the past. It's got a little more settled into our life and kind of cemented in ways that say the Whigs weren't secure, just for the fact that both the structures of politics, from gerrymandering to kind of the regional split between the parties, has really cemented a lot of their holds here. They've got certainly a big media and business interests backing up both parties, and that it might be a little harder to change. But yeah, nothing is permanent in any country's history, and certainly not in America. And what's really remarkable about the Republican change is, we often say this, this isn't your father's party. It really isn't.
No.
My dad was a Republican,
Yep.
And the Republican of the Reagan era, was kind of held together by 3 different coalitions, 3 different parts of a coalition. The kind of the libertarian strand, the national defense focus, and social conservatives, right? And they were all kind of held together by really a general principle of get the government off our backs, right? And so groups that you normally would find at loggerheads of the libertarians and religious right agreed on that in 1980. They both had general complaints about the government. What happened, though, is as Republicans got into power and became the government, arguments started to develop between those groups, and they found themselves more and more at odds. It's always been the kind of the social conservatives who want the party to exercise government power on behalf of their causes have largely been a minor voice. But in the Trump era, the rest of the party has come around on this idea of using government power, right? We're seeing this all over at the state level in particular.
Yep.
All of these laws about what you can teach in school, about trans rights,
Right.
About voting rights, about incarceration. There are a lot of real heavy-handed policies coming down by Republicans at the state level. And so the idea that this is the party that's going to get government off your back when it is the government and in your lives, very visceral things like abortion rights and, things like that. It really is a remarkable shift. So you're not alone in kind of questioning what's going on with the Republican Party.
Right. And
do y'all even know why they were originally called conservatives? It was because they wanted to protect land. They wanted to protect these beautiful spaces in America, such as Yellowstone and Yosemite and the Grand Canyon. The Republican Party of the 1880s through, I don't know, maybe like the 1920s or something, actually cared about protecting the wilderness so that we had public places of enjoyment where we could see nature. And now they're the party that wants to fucking rape the land, drill for oil. And, and we have centrist Democrats that do the same bullshit because we've had so many Republicans convert to democracy, to the Democratic Party, because they're going off the rails. They're going off the rails with their need to push forward evangelical beliefs, which are, well, I'd go even further and say Pentecostal beliefs, where they need to tell everybody how to behave, what to do with their body, what they should do in their bedrooms, how they should raise their children. It's they're not addressing real abuse. They are demonizing everybody around them. They're not the same party. And that's what the title of this video is. Top historian brings receipts for downfall of Republican Party. You know what? I hope you're right. I hope there is a downfall. But I also don't want a bunch of Republicans flooding the Democratic Party and trying to change our belief systems. I don't think that's the right answer either. Like, fucking form your own party or fix your own party. Stop bringing your problems to us.
It's a very authoritarian shift, and it does talk, as we talk of these shifts, you've studied extensively the shift. In the book, there's a great, we'll probably pull from the book quite a bit in this conversation. One of my favorite Kevin Cruz things to do is torching Dinesh D'Souza regularly on the internet, on the Twitter machine. And one of I think the chapter you wrote in the book is about that Southern strategy, that shift in the party. So, that is kind of where we are to. It is where we've been brought this day. Why do you think they cling to that idea that there wasn't? It seems like it's become, again, a part of this generation of Republican is denial that they were everything. Is it because they have to deny they were that other party, or where is the basis of the Southern strategy and then the shift in the party, and here we are today where it's being denied? So,
and again, so we only have to go back to George W. Bush years to see the really remarkable change on this. So the Southern strategy, for those who don't know, is in the 60s, but also kind of longer than that in both directions. Really in the 60s, it kind of came to the forefront, but the Republican Party kind of turned the page on its old identity as the party of Lincoln, the party of civil rights, and decided that if it was going to win national elections, it had to make peace with Southern conservatives, Southern white conservatives. And the sticking point there was their record on civil rights. They reached out to segregationists and they welcomed them into the party where they'd long been at odds. Now, this is an obvious story. And in the 60s, it is it unfolds in plain sight,
Right.
in terms of reporters covering it in real time, politicians themselves making statements about what they're doing. I mean, as I talk about in the essay, you've got Bill Dickinson, one of the first Republican congressmen out of Alabama, when he switches from the Democratic Party, says, "I am joining the white man's party." It's not subtle.
No.
Prentice Walker, the first Republican congressman from Mississippi, after he wins his election, he, again, another former Democrat, he switched to the party because of civil rights. The first place he goes is to a meeting of the Association for the Protection of the White Race, a Klan front.
Mm-hmm.
This is not subtle.
Right.
The Mississippi Republican Party in 1964 puts an embrace of segregation in its official party platform in 1964. Again, none of this is hidden. And we've known about this. Again, if you look at the archives for Nixon and Goldwater, it's all over their private documents. They talk about it in their memoirs. Nixon's strategists talk about this in the press. Right. Kevin Phillips in 1970 is talking to the New York Times on the record about how they're going to get Negro-phobe white voters in the South to switch to the Republican Party. Okay, so all of this was on the record, which meant in the Bush era, there was a really, I think, a sincere effort on the part of the Bush administration to own up to this and turn the page.
Right.
There was a real desire, I think, on the part of the Bush era Republicans, and whatever criticism I have about Bush, I'm not a huge Bush fan, but on this point, I think there was a real sincere effort to turn the page. Bush himself, his cabinet was multiracial. We had Condi Rice and Colin Powell and Alberto Gonzalez, tried to make real liberal moves on immigration reform. I think born out of his experiences in Texas. I think he understood that issue and really tried to change it. And as part of that, the party acknowledged this past and apologized for it. Two different chairmen of the RNC, Ken Millman and Michael Steele, at different times made speeches where they acknowledged this and apologized for it. I think it was a sincere effort to turn the page.
Yeah.
Well,
They just had Michael Steele on one of their other episodes, actually. And it was so interesting because, for those of us who have been entering and trying to bring the Democratic Party back to the left, that dude is trying to... He's said that he's still a Republican because he wants to steer them away from all this hateful rhetoric and bring them back to their core values of less government interference. That would be fucking fantastic, but I just don't think he can do it. I'm surprised he even got elected as an RNC chair, given the fact that he has somewhat progressive social values and he's a black man. And they have become so racist at this point. Like, how do you even connect with that party anymore? Like, they want black people dead. They want LGBTQIA people dead. They want women dead. You think that's not what they believe in? That's the policies they're advancing.
10 years later, we get into the Trump era, and rather than trying to turn the page from that racist past, they were doing policies that echoed it. And
Right.
so they couldn't apologize for this thing because they thought there was nothing to apologize for. So some people struck upon a really interesting idea, which was to pretend it never happened, right? So D'Souza does a lot of this. Political scientist Carol Swain wrote a piece in which she did a thing for Prager University. That's the springboard for my piece in the Myth America collection.
Yep.
About how the Southern strategy never happened and it wasn't simply invented out of nothing by liberal academics in our own time. It's crazy. I mean, it is insane to argue this. The idea that I would have to write an essay showing that the Southern strategy was not a myth. If you told me that 10 years ago, I would have laughed at you. It was like, it'd be like, talking about the sun being the center of the solar system.
Right.
We all know this, right?
Right.
So, but that's what I had to do in this piece, and sadly, it's necessary because it's really been a push on the part of these partisans to deny this very obvious fact of history.
Do you think? I think it's almost like they want to embrace those policies, so you have to, you have to skip that middle part. And those who everyone you just described is a rhino now, right?
Right. Yeah.
I had Michael Steele on the show a couple of months ago. Same thing. Those guys are the rhinos now because they want to accept this past and acknowledge it. It's sad, but it does tie into.
And let me just say, the really ironic thing here is that
here's the thing. I'm sorry, Republicans. It's completely unacceptable for you to try and bring us back to the 50s and white supremacy, where women were barefoot and pregnant abused by their husbands. It was difficult to get a divorce. Black people were getting lynched. I mean, y'all attack every single minority group possible. Asians, Muslims. Why are you all so miserable? That you have to constantly, like, demonize the people around you? Why can't you just, like, live your life and try and be successful? Are you afraid that if you don't have that extra advantage of being white, that you're not going to be as successful? Well, fucking do better then. Study up.
That's a lead right off the gun. The second lead is Bernard Williams. His experience running the second leg, he has run on that position on Florida's winning team at this year's NCAA championships. The third leg, Brian Lewis. Lewis, still coached by Norfolk State. Steve Riddick anchored the winning U.S. team at the 76 Olympics, did Riddick in Montreal. And, of course, the anchor is Maurice Green. He already has taken the gold in the 100 and once more here on the anchor leg of the 4x100.
Well, Maurice Green said before these games started, just get the stick to me, and wherever it is, I'll make sure we get gold.
This, you know, when, you know, you have Republicans out there and they're like, all about patriotism, right? Like, if you kneel during the anthem, then apparently, you know, that's disrespectful to America, right? But what we had happen down here in Sydney, the Sydney Games, was some really cocky athletes draping themselves in the flag, and it fell flat, y'all.
But he's waiting for it. If that swagger doesn't tell you what it's all about for Maurice Green, then you'll never understand.
Well, one of the possible challengers would appear to be Jamaica to the United States. There's Lindell Frater, their leadoff man who went to TCU.
Jamaica in the outside lane. The best thing you could hope for if you're the United States is for Jamaica to have a great pass through the first two legs so you have some competition.
Here are the lane assignments with the United States in lane 5 and Jamaica's in lane 6. The U.S. team had the fastest time.
American cockiness is not limited by race, by the way. And you know what I've been told by like some of my European friends is that when Americans travel to Europe, they just have an automatic assumption that we're going to be rude and crass with them. That's how they view Americans. But for some reason they like Californians, so I guess I'm in the clear.
The semifinals, 37-8-2.
And the thing the United States has going for them here, Tom, is this will be the second round in a row that they've run the same four guys together. There were 2 changes made out of round 1, but in round 2 and in this final, same 4 men. Gives them a chance to have some consistency. Passing a baton that's about the size of a paper towel roll. Weighs just a little bit more.
Jamaica getting into the blocks with
Let's do it.
John Drummond of the U.S. By the way, the Cuban team had a semifinal win. They could be a threat too. Maurice Green still unable to stand still.
Right, it was the marathon. That's right. I'm not marathon. I'm sorry. What do they call this bullshit? When you have to pass the baton, right?
And they're underway in the 4x100 with John Drummond of the United States. And Drummond is out quickly already, making up the stagger on Jamaica. Second leg coming up with Bernard Williams getting the baton from Drummond. He's steaming down the backstretch. He's already ahead of Jamaica. Brian Lewis will run the third leg for the United States. Here's the baton pass. And Lewis has it. Lewis into the curve. And he's running quickly to find Maurice Green. Green to run the anchor. Here's the baton pass. Maurice Green reaches, takes it, and sets off. Maurice Green passing runners. Brazil into second, Cuba third. But they won't hit the world's fastest baton. Well, once Maurice Green got the baton, forget about it.
It was all over. Maurice Green has so much confidence in what he likes to call his top-end speed, and you got to believe that he was fatigued after running the 100 meters, but he didn't have to run the 200 here, so he had time to rest and get ready for this relay. This is exactly what he wanted, to come here and strike gold and get his name in the history books.
It appears that Drummond gave him a nice lead right off the start.
Boy, Drummond really saved this. He had a fantastic start, but watch, he misses on the first time, but he corrects it, and they don't lose too much. They probably lost the world record right there.
Here's the second exchange to Brian Lewis.
Now, this one's a little bit better. Brian Lewis has good speed when he gets the stick. And now, you know, it's just getting it to Maurice Green. And Maurice Green, right here, you have to be patient. Look at him. Do I go? Do I go? But he waits his time, stays in the outside of the lane so that Brian Lewis can come on the inside. There's the stick. Nice baton move, and then it's an explosive sprint down the straightaway.
Green had been so impatient, he could hardly contain himself before the race, and even awaiting the baton, not the world record, but still the second fastest time in Olympic history.
But now let's look at how inappropriately they acted as winners.
Here from the U.S. team.
Gentlemen, congratulations on bringing the gold medal back to the United States. Maurice, let's start with
they didn't
you
even
here.
show it.
4 years ago, you were crying in the stands. Now you leave Sydney with 2 gold medals. What does it tell you, and what have you learned about just how fragile success is?
Okay, they left out the footage of them strutting around and flexing their muscles while holding up the American flags. Yes. It was so pathetic. It was so rude to all of the other countries that competed in the race. It was rude to Americans because you're not supposed to do that with flags. And I mean, you can see them draped in them right now, but this was an international scandal when it fucking happened, you guys. Okay, I think we got like 1 more minute on this video. Let's see what they have to say.
The people who see themselves as kind of the real the real conservative Republicans,
Right.
in erasing the Southern Strategy story, they're erasing the story of what Goldwater transformed the party, right? Of Reagan's transformations, right? They're ignoring the real work there, pretending that it was all kind of on autopilot from Lincoln to today and nothing changed. It's really remarkable.
It's bizarre. I mean, I can't tell you how often my mentions, as I think I mentioned in our pre-show, how it's nice to read comments that don't hate me. But the ones that do are always like, oh, you know, the Democrats, the KKK. I was like, yeah, thanks for that history lesson. I had no idea. You know, I had the unique experience of living in Richmond during the George Floyd protest. And I actually attended several events around the Robert Lee Monument during that long occupation, that disgraceful monument to racism. You know, a fascinating history there about how it was built. You know, why are these statues? I mean, again, tying into that what we just talked about, where they're rewriting history, this passion for the monument, and the monuments matter so much. And I'll tell you a personal part of it. The Charlottesville riots, and if those who watch the show are new, may not know, but my son-in-law is a National Guardsman of Virginia. At the time, he was a military policeman. My son-in-law guarded the Lee statue in Charlottesville during the Unite the Right rally.
Oh,
I have this visceral reaction to that day because I actually just got knee surgery, so I was stuck at home on a couch watching and every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of the soldiers in uniform and riot gear in the distance defending a fucking statue from conservatives, I'm doing air quotes, because of that.
That's got to be hard, you guys. That's got to be hard to admit that your own offspring fucking was involved in something so historic like that. That he was defending a Confederate war hero statue in Charlottesville. Oh my God. How fucking embarrassing. I'm so glad that my relatives are not like this. I mean, well, I have one, but like we're estranged, so no problem.
How does this all of a sudden this we can't move on your monuments play into that? And why is it so important that these things don't come down or they become symbols for their movement?
Yeah, it's really, you know, the monument struggle is really interesting because the people who are defending them always say, this isn't about hate, this isn't about heritage, this is history we're protecting.
It's now history.
Okay, first of all, as an historian, let me just assure people listening at home, when we teach history, we actually don't use monuments. we use books and primary documents.
That's weird.
It's much easier to get them into the classroom than to lug a statue in. Okay, so first of all, that's not the point. Second of all, we have to remember these statues aren't some sort of history that was rooted in the South in 1865 and 1866, right after the Civil War, right? These are statues that were created long after the fact. Most of them in the 1910s and 1920s, at kind of the depths of Jim Crow. Another wave in the 1950s and 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. And there's no accident that they appeared in those times, because they were not an effort to preserve history. They themselves were an effort to rewrite history, to advance this idea of a lost cause, in which the Civil War wasn't about slavery. It was a noble cause. It wasn't about treason against the United States. These were good people and we should revere them. But also, we should revere the social order they represented. They were fighting to preserve slavery and white supremacy, and we need to hold that true today. And so you mentioned the one in Charlottesville. I went to school in Chapel Hill.
There you go.
And we had a statue there called Silent Sam.
Silent Sam.
And it was still on campus. It's gone now, but it was still on campus when I was there in the 90s.
Yep.
And we didn't really know the history of this. We knew it was vaguely Confederate, but in the time since, we've dug into the history of Silent Sam, and all you have to do to understand what these statues meant is to listen to the people who put them up.
Right.
All these speeches, all these statues had speeches that were given of dedication. Yeah. The one in Chapel Hill, the guy behind it literally says, when we put the statue up, he reminisces about how not far from here, I whipped a Negro wench until her shirt was dripping with blood, right? And this statue is to remind her and people like her of the proper order. Wow. It's not subtle, okay?
Yeah, it's not subtle. It's not fucking subtle. And, like, I literally have been to Jefferson's plantation when I was living in Virginia and did a tour of the area where he lived, which he had his black slave mistress in the basement, in this like mud basement of, they discovered this later, like after I even like went there, but I've been in that room. I know what room they're talking about. That's where they kept her. He has the, like, this really, he was obviously a very scientific man, and he had like a clock. It was like a grandfather clock where it told the day of the week, the time of the year, like everything, right? And so its cords actually dropped all the way into the basement, into her room. He kept her down there as a sex slave. Thomas Jefferson. They showed us the remnants of where the slaves stayed. It was depressing as fuck to see this sort of dominance over an entire other human race, you know, like they were there only to serve him while he was trying to talk about democracy and shit. Oh my god, dude. And if you see his quarters are like so fucking spacious and beautiful. It was so gross. It was hard. It was hard to look at that and like go through that experience of actually seeing how fucking racist these people were.
I always said if somebody wants to defend a Confederate monument, they should have to go read the speech that was given to dedicate that monument to a multiracial crowd today and see if they can get through it without realizing what they're endorsing. Right. So these statues were themselves an effort to rewrite history. And also, we often...
By the way, I think, I believe what he's talking about, Chapel Hill, is actually in Virginia because that was the Confederate capital, right? Richmond. There's a street called Monument Avenue. They just, I think it was like a couple or maybe more years ago, they just tore down all the statues because it was just it was so horrific that they still had this up. And like the entire time I worked there, I had people of multiracial persuasions, whatever. Like they came from but they were local. Right, they grew up there, and so they had never had any other experience of living in America, and they're like, this is part of our history, so therefore we got to keep it up. But you've got all these Confederate war heroes for these traitors of the nation that, if I remember correctly, they were all facing west. And at the very end, you have a statue of Arthur Ashe, the tennis player, facing east. Like, they can't even face him in the same direction as the other statues. And the statue they made of him was so fucking offensive. They had him raising up his tennis racket with children underneath him. He's holding a book and raising up his tennis racket. And the children are raising up their arms like they're afraid they're about to get hit by him. And he looks like he's about to hit them. And they made a statue like that, and they had it facing in the entire different direction as all the other Confederate war heroes. It was so fucking offensive. And, you know, they had that. They had, I think the other one was like Bojangles. Like, the lead singer of GWAR wrote an article about this before he died. And because GWAR all went to VCU, they were art students. That's why they have these crazy costumes and are just completely off the cuff with their lyrics. They're just crazy with their lyrics. But he addressed the fact that there's was like obvious and apparent racism still existing in Richmond, and it took them so long. It took national pressure to take those statues down. And even the black population of Richmond was, at least the people I knew through work, were like, it's part of our history. Really? It's part of your history. That was disgusting. It was so hard to live in Richmond. Like, I didn't think I was having cultural shock initially, but it didn't take me but a few months to realize I was.
People say, oh, well, these were a product of their time. You can't judge them by 2023. These were a product of their time. Whenever they were done, the 19 teens, the 1950s, these are a product of their time. No, people at the time saw what these were about. Yep. People at the time objected to them. Yep. And if you read this essay by Karen Cox in Myth America, who tackles this brilliantly, Karen knows.
They have a Civil War museum on the James River that once you go in, they have this like shocking message about that the Civil War really was about slavery. And it's so bizarre to listen to this recorded message that is trying to convince the locals that, I'm sorry, you're wrong. It wasn't about states' rights. It is so weird as a Californian to walk into that museum and listen to how they're trying to re-educate Virginians because they are so goddamn racist and stupid that that was like one of the first things we did when we moved to Virginia was go to that museum, and it was shocking. It was fucking shocking, you guys.
That when these monuments went up, people were objecting to them. They were largely African Americans in the North, right? And so if you count them as people, and I think you should, then you can't say no one objected to them. People saw them at the time for what they were, and we've got to see them for what they were right now.
That's brilliant. And that ties nicely into my next question about the chapter that follows later from...
And if we consider them as people, as I think you should, oh my God, man. Oh my God, dude.
From Glenda Gilmore about the myth of the good civil rights protest, right? And I really enjoyed that one because we talk about how there's this idea that, you know, those were very peaceful and civil, and of course Martin Luther King was a very peaceful, gentle man. And one of my favorites, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen it, The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks, the documentary on Netflix.
You know what? I'm sorry, but as far as I know, Virginia still celebrates Lee Jackson Day. Right? It's the day after Martin Luther King, or maybe the same day as, I'm not sure. But they literally tried to overlap his holiday with an offensive Confederate holiday celebrating white supremacists. That's on the books for Virginia, you guys.
had Soledad O'Brien on the show a couple months ago. She's one of the producers, and it shows that not only was not Mrs. Rosa Parks not this sweet old little lady who was just tired from a long day, she was a young woman actually, and she was one hard hitting activist, right? You know, and so that it's interesting for Glenn to go into that this backlash, but I do see just this myth. But I also can't help but see the action now is similar, right? With the outburst of protest intensity, the gun deaths, the reaction.
You know, and the sad thing is, like, for those of you who are in minority groups, whether you're Black or Asian or Latino or whatnot, you know, you face a lot of direct racism where you're hearing it directly. But your white compadres, we hear more than you do. We hear all of the silent racists because they think that if they're in the company of other white people, they can fucking say it, right? And I'll tell you straight up, some of the most racist people I have met are in LA County. Some of the most racist people I've met are in Virginia. Some of the most racist people I've met are in Texas. And I'll tell you straight up, they are far more lax talking about that shit in front of white people than they are in front of you. You're only going to deal with the ones who are crazy and hostile. We have to deal with all the silent racism that's in the background, the whisper racism. And it's so uncomfortable and gross. And we have to make a snap judgment in every moment of, are we going to address it when it happens?
But the reaction from the Republican supermajority, the reaction that it goes to that myth that this is the wrong way to protest, right? That was the good protest, right? I mean, talk a little bit about what that concept and how it frames with the arguments we're having today. Even as we speak right now, Zoe Zephyr has been forced out of her position in the Montana legislature, is working out the hallway, right? So, do you think that good protest idea frames that thing? Because I actually am writing a piece right now, because they all use decorum, right? You know, but decorum, right?
Yeah. So what Glenn talks about is we've reduced Martin Luther King Jr. in every possible way. On MLK Day, politicians, especially in the Republican Party, will trot out the only one line they think he ever spoke from the March on Washington about the content of the character, not the color of their skin. They've all got that one down. Without realizing that he was much more complex than that. Even if all you ever read from him is the "I Have a Dream" speech, it talks about police brutality, it talks about poverty, talks about militarism, talks about voting rights, talks about a whole lot of other things that we're still arguing about today. So King himself was much more complex, especially later in his life, right? But the last year of his life, King's approval rating in polls is like 33%. I mean, he was assassinated for a reason. A lot of people hated him, right? But we have simplified and sterilized Martin Luther King Jr. now to the point where is a simple story of he stood up, told us all racism was bad. We erased racism, problem solved, right?
Oh, God, no, we didn't. Okay, you know what? I'm going to end here. I'll just drop the link because I thought it was only 1 minute, but like it was because the sun was reflecting on my phone. And we are about up to 50 minutes of my commentary on it. So I'm going to have to clip the video at this point. I might come back to it and do a part 2. I'm not sure. But, what an upsetting topic. And, yeah, it was kind of horrifying for me to go to live in Virginia for 3 years and find out that even the Black population was like, no, it's part of our history. Really? Can't fight for yourselves? Like, I mean, that was very upsetting to me. I felt really alone while I was living there. Like, I felt like I grew up in a completely different planet. And that was disturbing to me, that they just fucking accepted these white supremacist statues all over their fucking city. That was hard, you guys.